living La Vida low carb. This show is changing lives. We talking about your diet, trying to get you feeling right. Cut up them avocados, fry some eggs, time to explore the longest running health podcast, hosted by Jimmy Moore. Time to give up the crappy garbage, we're getting into ketosis. Every day is a new step to your goal, yeah, you're getting closer. Motivated and focused, don't stop, just go. Time to get inspiration from the Living La Vida Low Carb Show. Hey, the livinglowcarbshow.com.
So guys, that right there is my friend Cynthia Thurlow. She's over on Instagram, Cynthia _Thurlow _ just put a couple of underscores after her name. She is a nurse practitioner and the author of a brand new book we're going to talk all about here today. This is the pre-pub copy, Intermittent Fasting Transformation, all about her IF45 plan. Really excited to talk to you. And as you were saying just before we came on the air, that my book, The Complete Guide to Fasting, was one of the things that was like, hey, if Jimmy and Jason can write a book, so can I. So congratulations. As of the recording of today is the release date. The Ides of March is your release date. You'll never forget.
Yes, and that's actually something that we felt was significant. And I'm laughing because my dogs are now coming to check out this discussion. But yeah, I feel very humbled and very grateful because you know, your book and Jason's book really started the journey for me, and now I get to really focus in and hone in on women and explain the beautiful differences about our physiology that ensure that we have to fast a little differently. It's not a bad thing. It's not a negative. We shouldn't apologize for our hormones, but we do have to intrinsically embrace what makes us unique and fast a little bit differently.
Well, I'm going to encourage you by telling you this book came out 6 years ago and still sells very, very well. So the intermittent fasting is incredibly high. And let's start there. Why? Why do you think, other than people, educators like yourself and myself and other people like Jason and all the people talking about fasting now, why do you think fasting is so alluring? Because it's an uphill battle to tell people, don't eat.
Right, exactly. Well, I think there's a multifactorial reason for why that is the case. And I think a lot of it stems from the fact that on a lot of levels, everything that we've taught our patients, everything we've been taught in school has suggested that we have to eat to stoke our metabolism. The meal frequency is the way that we lead a virtuous, healthy life. And I would be the first person to say we got it all wrong. Everything I learned in my medical training was wrong. Everything that I taught patients in the late 1990s, early 2000s was wrong. And so I think some of it stems from poor medical advice, really not leaning into the research truly. I think a lot of it is sustained by comfort. And I'll be honest with you, I think that we as a nation are very uncomfortable with feeling hungry. We're uncomfortable with pushing our bodies. You know, I love your cold ice baths. I mean, Hormesis is where it's at.
Yes.
And so I like to remind people that we really have to start focusing on finding strategies and ways to get a little uncomfortable. And that discomfort could be as benign as I really understand what true intrinsic hunger is and what it feels like, because we have gotten so comfortable that we eat, you know, 6, 7, 8, 9 times, 10 times a day. We drink all of our calories. We're not moving our bodies. We're certainly not plunging ourselves into cold baths, but we're not doing the things that are designed to make us stronger and more resilient. And so we are largely becoming exactly the antithesis of that. We are becoming...
So Cynthia, it's even worse than that. It's not only that people are reticent to do it and they like to eat a lot, it's encouraged. I have heard dietitians, and I know you have too, oh, if you want to control your blood sugar, eat every 2 to 3 hours. And I'm going, that is what? Like, that makes no common sense.
Yeah. Well, and I can tell you clinically, I don't know if your viewers know this about my background, but I worked for 16 years in cardiology as a nurse practitioner. So you better believe I've seen the worst of the worst of the worst. And I can tell you that my colleagues, for the most part, did not believe that nutrition played any role in diabetes, heart disease, stroke risk, etc. And in fact, I think a lot of patients, not unique to cardiology, let me be clear, were shamed into believing that they didn't have enough willpower, that it was all about, you know, not wanting it badly enough. And that to me brings tremendous embarrassment as a byproduct of us not really understanding what these highly processed, hyper palatable foods have been doing to our brains, and hormonal dysregulation in the body, and creating cravings that are hard to kind of mitigate and navigate. And certainly, I think on a lot of levels, there are many of us as healthcare providers and obviously wellness professionals that now know better, and we're speaking out. And there are definitely registered dietitians and doctors and nurses and educators like yourself that are taking a stand. Obviously, you were way ahead of the curve, and for that, I'm so very grateful. But I think many of us are starting to really speak out and to really spend time and effort to help people understand that it wasn't a lack of willpower. Your body gets hijacked by these chemicals and these scientists who design bliss points so that they can make it as intoxicating and as inflammatory as possible. There's a great book called Salt, Sugar, Fat. I'm sure you probably have read it. That book made me so angry. For anyone that's listening that wants to understand more about the processed food industry, obviously Robert Lustig, Jeffrey Smith have all done, really great, books in this area as well. But I think the more you understand about the biochemistry that's going on in the brain, and how that is dysregulating all of these normal satiety cues, the shut-offs, like I'm full, let me push the plate away kind of stuff, you start to understand that we're really put at a tremendous disadvantage. And then you add in, the diet industry that convinces us it's the latest potion, pill, or powder that's going to save us. And it's a complete toxic recipe for ill health. I mean, it is, and I'm sure you have strong opinions about a lot of these things, but it's really created an environment that is not sustainable.
There's another book along the same lines as Sugar, Salt, Fat by Michael Moss, called The Dorito Effect by Mark Schlatzker. Ooh, I interviewed him. This has been, he did this a decade ago, Cynthia. And we've known about this. And yet people are out there, oh, as long as I keep my calories down and I have my 100-calorie pack of my Doritos. I'm like, you're not understanding. It's designed to make you eat more. It's designed to make you hungry, not just calorically, but all the chemicals and all the additives and all the everything that go into that crappy garbage, as I call it, which makes fasting impossible. And that's why I think a lot of people, when they see that word,
it's triggering.
They get triggered because they're like, they think of it through the prism of where they are now in their diet, and they can't even not think about food. Now I'm carnivore, kind of keto-ish carnivore, and I never think about food. I have to remind myself, oh yeah, it's been a while since I ate last.
Yeah, well, and that's a beautiful thing. I mean, you will get to a point where you will be so fully satiated that you're not governed by thinking about food constantly. It's like, oh, I did all the things. Oh, it's 2:00 in the afternoon. I haven't eaten a meal.
Yes.
Isn't that freedom? Like, that to me is the direction we need to be going in. And ironically enough, I have 2 teenage boys. And so one of them, I love this, Instagram tells me how long I've been on Instagram today. And one of them, on his own, because he doesn't like to eat breakfast, he's a competitive swimmer. He eats a pretty hefty lunch and a pretty hefty dinner, but doesn't eat until after 10 o'clock in the morning. And so I think for a lot of people, once they get to the point where they are really leaning into satiety and they're really leaning into nutrient density, as you mentioned, carnivore-ish. I'm definitely more carnivore-ish than anything. I would say carnivore-ish with some low carb, carb cycling, but encouraging people to experiment and to not get sidelined by, one methodology worked for you for a couple months and therefore you can't ever pivot or deviate. Meaning, people throughout their lifetime may be primal. They may go to keto. They may do a little carnivore-ish. They may do full carnivore. And the understanding that at different points in our lives, we may need something completely different. But nutrient density and satiety are really, really important concepts. And for anyone who's triggered by the word fasting, I usually say eat less often.
Yeah, it's kind of, in fact, when I used to sign the Complete Guide to Fasting, I write just don't eat ... from time to time.
Right. And I think, that's a really important distinction. If that word is triggering, in fact, I got, as I'm sure you do too, I got an angry DM the other day saying I was suggesting that people should have an eating disorder. And I said, no, I'm not suggesting that. But if that word triggers you and that's what you see in your mind's eye, then perhaps the way to reframe it is to say, eat less often.
Well, and here's the thing. Everybody, I mean, everybody listening to this and watching this right now, you are fasting if you're not putting food in your mouth right now. You're fasting right now. Everybody that goes to sleep every single night, you're fasting. Now, it may
Yeah,
not be a long fast, but
right.
12 hours for a lot of people is not uncommon. So we're talking about intermittently 16, so 4 more after you wake up. Hello.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. And I think once people, become, we use the term fat adapted. Sorry, everything's blooming here in Virginia. And so the allergies have started early. Yeah, exactly. That's how I feel. Like every time I do an interview, I'm like, I have to apologize. My nose is a little runny from all the stuff that's blooming
Oh,
really
it's
early.
it's that diet. You need to start eating some more carbs, and that'll go away, Cynthia.
No, thank you. No, thank you. But I think it's really important for people to understand that 12 hours of digestive rest is even beneficial. We know there are all these intrinsic digestive properties like the migrating motor complex and other things that go on like a janitor in the digestive system, that if we're eating every 2 to 3 hours, guess what happens? Our digestive system is not particularly efficient, just like our blood sugar is not particularly efficient if we're eating with that degree of frequency. And so if anyone is ever used a continuous glucose monitor or a glucometer, it's a really great way to get a sense for, what your nutritional choices and your stress and your sleep, what the net impact is on your blood sugar. It's really enlightening. And this is something I generally recommend for people that are insulin resistant as well as people who are not. I think it's really critically important. And I say this with love and reverence because I've been carb cycling and doing low carb for a long time. But certain types of carbs don't like me. It doesn't matter how much I want it to be different. I love plantains. Plantains do not like me. And the only way I figured that out was actually by checking my blood sugar around the meals. And consistently, doesn't matter how I prepare them, I get a massive blood sugar spike. And so I say, okay, that's something I can't have in my diet, and that is okay.
Yeah, fruit is the exact same way for me. Even berries, just I gotta avoid them. It just
Yeah.
doesn't much for me. Positive. There might be great phytonutrients. They might be super foods, some of those things, but if they don't do right in you, they're not right for you.
Yeah, and that's okay. Like I actually was having a conversation with a group of women a few nights ago, and I was saying if you can't moderate, then you eliminate.
Yes.
Meaning, like I don't do well with gluten-free flours, meaning like baked goods, things like that, because I cannot moderate. This is full transparency, Jimmy. I'm like being really real.
Yeah.
So I just don't eat it because one brownie becomes many, one cookie becomes many. However, I can moderate dark chocolate like a boss. And so that's usually what I have. And so if I want something sweet, that's what I'll have. And I lean into it. And I always say, like, I've eliminated so many things from my diet. I provide no explanations for why. I see there's nothing wrong with having a piece of dark chocolate. However, the cakes, the cookies, that kind of stuff, I just don't do well with at all.
Well, dark chocolate is so rich, it's almost self-limiting, especially if you eliminate sugar. Like, I really can't handle all the little keto sweet treats that are out there. I remember having some at various conferences, and I'm just like, that's for a market, but it's not me.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of it's like the inulin that's in some of those products and some of the alluloses. So I think it makes me feel like a gas balloon. Like I always say, like I'll look at my stomach and I'm like, okay, like that didn't taste bad, but if my gut is then distended because of all the fibers and sugar alcohols, that's probably not benefiting my beneficial bacteria in my gut.
Well, and then even though it might be non-caloric or low caloric, that doesn't mean it doesn't have an excitable note in your brain that's telling your brain, oh yeah, remember all those sugar foods that created this same effect? We want those things now. And so that's always been my fear about sweet taste on the tongue, making you want that sweet taste that's the real thing.
Yeah, and I think this is a perfect segue into a question that I fielded yesterday. I know stevia, yes, based in lab animals, you may not get a calculated insulin or glucose response, but I know if I put something sweet on my tongue, that generally begets me wanting more sweet things. And so I've had colleagues say, what do you think of, these stevia sweetened products? I'm like, again, if you can moderate, great. If you can't, eliminate. And so I think it goes right along with that those dopaminergic connections in our brains, they light up. We're no different than a lab animal in that way. And we seek pleasure-seeking behaviors. And it could be, sometimes people want to look at certain kinds of entertainment. It could involve certain types of foods. And so I think that on a lot of different levels, you have to know yourself, be honest with yourself, and certainly, kind of lean into what works and what doesn't work. And for each one of us, it might be a little bit different. But I find more often than not, if I can just say, if you can't moderate, eliminate, then people are like, oh my gosh, thank you for saying that. Because this moderation, not deprivation mindset and methodology that's kind of pervasive in our culture, I'm like, I don't know many people that can moderate hyperpalatable foods. No. Like the best example I can give you, in my house, I'm the only female, and I don't eat pizza because I don't do dairy or gluten. But like my husband, who is a pretty disciplined person, if there's pizza in the house, he can't stop at 2 pieces. And so we have to, I guess, be grateful that I have teenage boys, because there are never leftovers in my house in any capacity. But he says all the time, he says it's the perfect savory, kind of delectable meal. And I say, if you can't stop at 2 pieces of pizza, that's a good sign that you're lighting up those centers in your brain that are saying more, more, more.
Oh, and then when I was a kid, speaking of Moore, my last name, my dad, it was my older brother, Kevin. It was my younger brother, Nathan. Kevin was 4 years older than me. Nathan, 6 years younger than me. And so we would all go out with Dad, and he would say, all right, let's all get a large pizza to start. And it was a eat the most. Kevin always killed all of us. He was the king, and unfortunately he died 2008 of heart disease and diabetes and morbid obesity. So there is a bit of a connection there. But yeah, and the whole studies with the rats being able to like hit the button, and they'll keep hitting that button as long as they keep getting the sugary food or the sweet food, whatever. Those are always fascinating to me. But let's segue into fasting. Again, you guys that came in late, we are talking to the author of the brand new book, Intermittent Fasting Transformation. This is Cynthia Thurlow, a nurse practitioner. Is this your debut book? Is this the first one you've ever done?
This is my debut. Yeah, this feels it's a little surreal, Jimmy. I have to be honest with you. It's a little surreal.
Oh, my very first with a major publisher was this one.
Yeah.
And I was at a conference, one of the paleo conferences when it came out, and I got a copy of it from my publisher there, and I just sat there and just...
Yeah, that's exactly. My publisher sent a box of my book.
Yes.
When I opened it, I was like, this is just such a surreal experience. Like I'm deeply grateful, but it's very strange. And I'm sure for you put all your ideas out there, and then they show up in a book, and then people start digesting the information. And in a lot of ways, I have all of your books. So I have cholesterol clarity, I have keto clarity. And I love that, you and I think are very aligned, that we try to make information accessible for everyone. Like, you can use it as a resource as a clinician, but you can also read it and understand it as a lay person. And that's a talent, because one of the things I struggled with when I was writing this book, and my publisher and my editor kept saying, Cynthia, you're not writing this as a PhD. You're not writing this as a researcher. No one's asking you to write in that detail. Like, you want it accessible. And I was like, okay, I have to keep reminding myself of that, how important that is. That is a gift to be able to connect on a level that you can take complex concepts and make them accessible. It's a really important gift.
That was the advantage that I had, because I am a lay person. I don't think like a medical person. I can understand somebody telling me medical jargon and then try to like spit it out in everyday language. So this guy, Eric Westman, oh my gosh. I was
so smart.
Stop. And he's gotten better over time. Hopefully I influenced him a little bit, but yeah. And then I like the fact that I'm held accountable, because there's good to have people like you who you have the background, but yes, you can talk nerdy, but you want to talk to the average person, which you do a great job on camera. Go follow her on Instagram, you guys. She definitely does a great job of explaining things all the time. Again, Cynthia Thurlow _. You do all kinds of Instagram lives and all kinds of stories that really teach well. You do it well on camera. Some reason, I guess it didn't come out as easily on paper, but it's a skill. And now that you have the bug, you're gonna want to write so many books. I have 10 books in my head right now. I want to write. I'm like thinking of ideas.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think there are more books in my brain. It's more the concept of how to make it really unique without, kind of falling down the habit of, there are a lot of people that write essentially the same thing in every one of their books.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to go down that
No.
path. I definitely want each book to be unique, be able to stand on its own, for it to be powerful and impactful. And I think that's really important. I'm laughing because my father, I was born at the time my dad was finishing his PhD. And one of the reasons why I never did a doctorate was because my father talked about how painful it was to write his doctoral thesis. And yet the irony is I then go on to write a book that required a lot of like effort and research. And, I haven't done a PhD, but I would imagine that, definitely gives me a sense of probably what people go through while they're working on their thesis.
I did a master's thesis.
Me too.
That was intense, having to do even just a
Yes.
thesis,
Yeah.
and then defending it in front of peer professors. And whew. So yeah, once I did that, I'm like, writing a book, that's nothing.
Yeah. Right. Well, and the irony is I remember at the time, I mean, this was a long time ago. I was finishing my thesis in like 2000, and everything we knew at that time about the topic I wrote my thesis on has come about to be completely disproven. And so it's really interesting to realize that, at that time, that thought was current. And now I look back and I'm like, okay, well, I did a lot of research, and this is back when estrogen was starting to become, there was some degree of bastardization about estrogen replacement therapy. The irony being I'm now back in women's health, which is where I think I would have ended up if I hadn't fallen down the rabbit hole of cardiology. But I think on a lot of levels, like having the ability to articulate your thoughts in a cohesive manner, I think is really a powerful way. And I think also in the time and space that we're all in right now, it's important for us to get our thoughts out, however that manifests.
A lot of people ask me, Jimmy, how do you get such good deep sleep? Well, there's a lot of things that I do, but one of the newest things that I recently added is this upgraded magnesium from a company called Upgraded Formulas. Go to their website, upgradedformulas.com, and you can learn all about this nano technology that they use for this particular mineral of magnesium. Again, it's called upgraded magnesium, and it's got all the different forms of magnesium in it using the nanotechnology, so it gets absorbed a lot better. Guys, I have seen my deep sleep improve by as much as 30 to 40% simply by adding in this product along with sunshine exposure, darkness in the room, cooler temperature, all of the things that I always have done. So again, upgradedformulas.com is the website. Go check them out.
Well, and that holds people back from writing books. Again, Cynthia Thurlow here today, you guys. Intermittent Fasting Transformation. It's now available. The Ides of March, it's now out. But that's what holds people back, Cynthia. And I want to get into the book, but this is heading part of the conversation, is people think, well, I don't want to say things now in a book and then they've proven wrong later. I'm like, no, almost every book has had that happen.
Yeah.
Keto has had that happen. I put in there about higher fat, and now I believe you should probably put the focus on protein with the natural fats that come with it. That was not a belief when I was writing it in 2012, 2013,
Yeah.
that I now have 10 years later. So it's okay if you have changing beliefs and, oh, it's not going to be right down the road. You put it out there now, let people go down the rabbit hole. Because I wrote those books, you wrote this book now. So it's like, it comes around, it goes around.
Yes. And I think it's okay to say know better, do better. Like I say as a clinician, a lot of what I used to teach about nutrition and fat and cholesterol was completely wrong. Yeah. And I always say know better, do better. So, making a concerted effort to acknowledge that sometimes, our opinions are going to evolve, shift, and change. And that is okay. That is part of learning. That is part of growing. That is part of, thinking beyond, what you learned in school. And certainly I trained at a great place. But a lot of what I learned, it kind of makes me cringe. I used to tell patients, as an example, I used to tell patients to use, Brummel and Brown and Smart Balance. It makes me cringe that I didn't just say eat the butter. Yeah. But that was back when, we thought saturated fat was evil and terrible. And that was the bane of what was driving a lot of inflammatory issues and heart disease, et cetera.
Well, let's get into you pushing an eating disorder. I mean, fasting.
That probably won't be the last time I hear that, Jimmy.
No, no, no. I trust me, I get it all the time
Mhm.
too. I have for many years, but I want to focus on first about fasting because everybody talks about blood sugar and insulin control. Cool, all great. But the hormone connection, especially for women, take us down the rabbit hole of the benefits to the hormone, the whole endocrine system, especially the female endocrine system. How is fasting a powerful tool in their toolbox?
Well, I think we have to first talk about what a woman's menstrual cycle is like. So we know from the day we start bleeding until before ovulation, that's when the hormone estrogen, this is the follicular phase, when estrogen predominates. Women can get away with a whole lot more in this phase of their menstrual cycle. They can push their workouts, they can push the protein, fat macros, they can fast longer. And that is because in many ways, estrogen gives us the opportunity to be able to push our bodies in different ways. We know when we kind of transition after ovulation into the luteal phase, when progesterone predominates, different type of hormone, a little less insulin sensitive than estrogen. And so because progesterone tends to be a little bit more insulin resistant, this is not the time to be doing these really prolonged fasts that is going to push cortisol, that's going to drive more blood sugar dysregulation. So I often have to remind women, you're a rock star the first 2 weeks. That third week of your menstrual cycle, you can start kind of backing off on the intensity of your exercise, the duration of your fasting. I didn't say not fasting, but maybe you're doing 12 or 13 hours. And the other caveat is the week before your menstrual cycle, you don't want to be fasting more than 12 hours. So really it's digestive rest. Now, if you're at peak fertile years, so under the age of 35, really important to understand that your body, even if you choose not to become pregnant, your body is very sensitive to food scarcity. You know, there's a lot of communication, the hypothalamus pituitary axis, communication with the ovaries, the adrenals, etc. Food scarcity can be a real issue. So if you're a thin woman under the age of 35, peak cycling years, peak fertility years, those are women I generally don't recommend that they are fasting every day. Maybe they're fasting a couple times a week, beginning part of their menstrual cycle, follicular phase. However, if you're a woman that's insulin resistant, you know you're insulin resistant, you have a desire to get pregnant, there's probably some value from doing more regular fasting periods, but you have to lean into understanding that your menstrual cycle is not something to apologize for, that your menstrual cycle is closely interrelated to that hormonal regulation between the brain and the ovaries. I tell everyone, if your period's a little wonky, the first cycle or two you're doing fasting, that's okay. Your period goes away. That's a sign that for you, your body perceives this food scarcity piece is too much. You know, we talk about feast famine. So that's number one. I would say the other piece is perimenopause, the 5 to 10 years preceding menopause, and menopause, 12 months without a menstrual cycle, different time period. We are exquisitely sensitive to sleep quality, stress, nutrition, especially inflammatory foods, gluten, grains, dairy, sugar, soy, in particular, alcohol is another one, the right types of exercise. And so when we talk about hormonal regulation, our bodies aren't as adept at responding to stress because our ovaries are producing less progesterone. Progesterone is this kind of mellow hormone. It's the hormone that I always say helps us sleep, helps with mood disorders, anxiety, depression. We start producing less of that. We start having more circulating estrogen. This can create the perfect storm for weight gain, breast tenderness, moodiness, again, the sleep issues. And so really leaning into what is our bodies telling us and understanding that as we are making less progesterone in our ovaries, our adrenals are picking up the slack. And so if you're not managing your stress, you're eating a highly processed diet, you're not managing stress, and that doesn't mean 2 minutes of meditation once a day. That doesn't cut it anymore. You are setting yourself up for a degree of hormonal dysregulation that is going to make fasting more challenging. So I always say start with, sleep as a foundation to help manage blood sugar, to better manage insulin. And I tell people all the time that you really do have to think this methodically, but over time it is not something you're thinking about every day. But using those 4 areas as a barometer with which to check in with yourself to see where you are. So again, first 2 weeks of the menstrual cycle and perimenopause, you have the ability to do a little bit more fasting. Last 2 weeks, not as much, and really leaning into understanding what's going on physiologically, understanding, if you're going to have carbohydrates in your diet, I'm not anti-carb. the right types of carbs. You have more carbohydrate threshold the beginning part of your menstrual cycle than you do right before you get your cycle. And it's important for people to understand, like if they're trending their CGM data or glucometers and like, why is my blood sugar up the week before I get my menstrual cycle? That's a byproduct of progesterone. And so when we talk about hormonal regulation, there's a whole lot more than just the sex hormones, but I think it's super important to understand it's not just about insulin. It's not just about cortisol. There are a cascade of other hormones that are super, super important to lean into in terms of our physiology so that you understand how best to fast. Now, menopause, I have to touch on this. This is the only time in our lives, I would say, before we go through puberty and when we're in menopause, that our hormones are much more stable. There is not as much hormonal flux as when we are in our cycling years or perimenopause. So women in menopause can push the envelope a bit. They can put the accelerator down. They can do some longer fasts. They can do more prolonged fasts fairly effortlessly if all those lifestyle pieces are falling into place. Getting enough sleep, anti-inflammatory nutrition, doing the right types of exercise, which involve lifting heavy things and walking and not doing chronic cardio, which I've never been a fan of. I never liked. And then just understanding that they have to manage those things pretty well. Now, I can tell you without question, menopausal women seem to have the easiest time overall. I'm saying overall, there's always exceptions.
Yeah.
Overall, because they don't have to worry about, what's their progesterone from day to day, what's their estradiol from day to day. Things are a little bit more stable, although they can also be a little bit frustrating. And there are some unique aspects to menopause that in particular can be a source of endless frustration for a lot of women, but it doesn't mean it's not possible to do really, really well with fasting. I've seen some pretty incredible things happen for women.
Well, and that makes sense that fasting would be great for menopausal women, because isn't that when women tend to pick up a few more pounds, maybe start developing, maybe underlying a little bit insulin resistance if they don't change anything about what they were doing for ovulation? So suddenly fasting becomes an answer that they didn't know they needed an answer to.
Right. And the thing I find really interesting is that we know we become more physiologically insulin resistant. If you change nothing, we physiologically become more insulin resistant as we get older because we have waxing and waning estradiol, again, one of the key hormones that helps with insulin sensitivity. But it's also sarcopenia, so this muscle loss with aging, which is not a question of if, but when. So you want to maintain lean muscle mass. I talk a lot about this in the book, that most women are grossly under eating protein. I'm sure it's the same for men. And so making sure you're getting sufficient animal-based protein. And yes, animal-based protein is superior. And that is something that's important for people to understand. I'm not saying don't ever have your lentils or your quinoa, but you can't eat copious amounts of those kinds of carbs. So really kind of leaning into this piece about understanding that it's protein plus lifting heavy things. Maybe it's starting with body weight exercise. Muscle is the organ of longevity, a la Dr. Gabrielle Lyon. Really understanding that muscle protein synthesis, eating enough protein, building muscle is going to help with insulin sensitivity. Think of your muscles as glucose reservoirs. This is really, really important for people to understand. So stop the chronic cardio. Aim for more protein, really looking at, anywhere from 35 to 40 to 50 grams of protein with each meal. For most women, will shut off those satiety signals. So you won't want to keep eating because you're too darn full. Like I ate in between podcasts and IG lives, and I pushed my protein threshold because I knew today's a day, it's going to be busy. I'm not going to be able to probably sit down and have like a leisurely lunch. And so I'm very full right now. I probably won't eat until dinner time. And that's really a beautiful thing. So protein is your friend, healthy fats, the right types of carbs. But I find most women eat too little protein, not enough healthy fats, and too many carbs. So when you look at your plate, think about that.
And look, I think a lot of women have had it indoctrinated into them that they overeat. So they have traditionally ate, so they don't know what an appropriate amount of food is. So therefore, when they go into a fast, a la Cynthia Thurlow telling them to go on an intermittent fast, they're like, Cynthia, I'm starving 8 hours in. It's because you haven't trained yourself to build up the nutrition, not just calorically, but nutritionally dense. Nutrition density in there is also important. Like all of that comes into play about how successful you can be on a fast. Like you said, you had that one really nice meal. It's probably going to end up being an OMAD today for you. meal, and you're going to be able to fast for a very long time. Why? Because it was enough food and it was the nutrient density in the food that allow you to do that.
Yeah. And I think for anyone that, if you're watching this and you haven't been fasting or eating less often, like really the first step is to stop snacking, because if you don't allow yourself to snack between meals, you're going to be forced to reallocate what you're eating with each meal. And so push the protein. You will be full. You will not be looking for more food. You will say, I had my steak, I had my chicken, I had my fish, etc. I'm full. Like I had my non-starchy vegetables, I had my healthy fat in my meal. So salmon, ribeye, etc. are great examples of protein sources that have got.
That sounds like thinking of a surf and turf. As you said, salmon and ribeye, I was like, ooh.
Yeah. And I think each one of us have to decide like what works best. I tend to do better with leaner meats, leaner proteins, which is a bummer, but I think it's okay. I mean, I'll just add like butter to my vegetables or add some olive oil to a salad. I mean, there's all sorts of ways to get those healthy fats, the right healthy fats into your diet. And that does not involve blocks of cheese and bags of nuts. Like that's where I see a lot of women get into trouble. It's very easy. Like I love salted macadamia nuts, but you better believe I portion out a serving, I put the bag away because it's too easy. If you leave the bag out, all of a sudden two become, like a quarter cup becomes half the bag, and then you've derailed all your hard work. And so just acknowledging that sometimes those healthy fats, you have to try to keep to a portion size. Like I think a portion size of cheese is like the size of your like thumbnail. So it's really not a lot. It's easy to overeat that stuff.
Yes. Now I want to bring up a topic you brought up in your book, which I think is important regarding supplementation during the fast. When I first started kind of dibble dabbling in it and very sloppily fasting, learned from my mistake. I did things like kombucha and bone broth and thinking I needed those things. And I found that they actually stoked more hunger than anything. Probably because my body was interpreting, okay, we're eating, we're not eating. What's
It's like a wet balloon. What? Yeah.
And so there is this debate out there about whether you should use salt and other kind of electrolyte type of supplements versus not. There's also dry versus water fasting. Like, what say you on those topics?
I think this, so my nurse practitioner brain does not like the concept of dehydration. So I tend to be a water fast. I believe in clean fasting. Exactly. So Jimmy's got that. But you have to remember, I also have this cardiology background. So I'm a huge fan of electrolytes. And so I'm a big fan of, if you do nothing else, salt your food and salt your water. But I do like electrolytes. I like magnesium and chloride and sodium and potassium in the right amounts in your water. So in a fasted state, I am a big believer in the benefits of black coffee. It's bitter is what we want, because bitter is not going to evoke that insulin response. And there's all sorts of benefits from bitter teas and black coffee, including the polyphenol content, the boost in fat oxidation. And I remind people that we really want to be watering ourselves. Jimmy's got his water glass right there. Water with electrolytes, clearly, especially if you're going lower carb, if you're new to a low carb or ketogenic diet, as an example, as we lose glycogen, we will pull water, and you'll be doing a lot more urination, but you're also urinating out electrolytes. And that's why it's so critically important. I always say, like, electrolytes are almost always the first thing I think about, that really understanding that it's not just like woo-woo. This is actual science. When we talk about communication between cells, both intracellular and outside the cell, these electrolytes are really critically important. So part of fasting success involves understanding a clean fast. And also I am a big believer in water fasting, but not dry fasting. And I think it's because I know what happens to people clinically when they are grossly dehydrated, and it's not pretty. Now, with that being said, I know there are people that are proponents of dry fasting. It's just not part of my practice and not part of what I teach.
Oh, Jason and I, we avoided the topic in our book. We didn't even touch it because we're like, it's too dangerous. And
right.
I understand the benefits. Like, 1 day of dry fasting is equivalent to what, 2 days of water fasting. But in my eyes, water fast for 2 days. I don't understand why even like risk dehydration and all the things that come with that, from headache on. Headache is the least problems.
Yeah. And I think it's also important for people to understand, like, that may work for someone, but that's not the average person. I think it's really important to understand physiologically what happens with dehydration. A lot of times when people get hungry, it's not that they're hungry, it's that they're dehydrated. And you just think about, so as we're starting to head into warmer weather, where Jimmy and I are in this part of the country, Jimmy and I are not in the same state, but we're fairly close in terms of states. But it's starting to get warmer. There's more perspiration going on. We know that we get clinically dehydrated just going from when we go to bed at night till we wake up in the morning. So to set yourself up where you're kind of behind the rabbit hole in terms of trying to stay hydrated just makes no sense. And I find that the other piece is, as we actually get older, so north of 40, but oftentimes by the time we get to a point of dehydration, we're way beyond where we should be clinically. And this explains why, like, all of my little elderly patients were like, they would come in the hospital and we draw labs, and like their serum sodium was ridiculous because they didn't want to have the inconvenience of going to the bathroom, so they wouldn't drink water. And it's very easy to get dehydrated, and certainly easier from middle age onward. And sometimes we miss some of the cues until we're really dehydrated. By the time you get thirsty, you're way more dehydrated than you realize. And so from my perspective, best practice, stay hydrated. You want to be in a position where you're consuming some electrolytes, so you hold on to some of your water. There's Jimmy again with his water. Really, really important. But I like people to understand what's important about a clean fast so that you're going to get the best results. And that's bitter coffee, bitter teas. I know people always ask, it's like green tea, black tea. It's designed to be bitter because bitter tastes on our tongue generally are associated with polyphenol content. So, lots of these plant-based chemicals that have a lot of intrinsic benefits in our bodies, but also doesn't evoke an insulin response. You have like a sweet tea, like Celestial Seasonings, Apple Orchard, that's got natural flavors and God knows what else in it. That is sweet. That will definitely break your fast. And I think that's a distinguishing component. But I love that we're all aligned on this topic, because sometimes I'll get a question out of left field and people are like, why don't you like dry fasting? And I'm like, because I don't believe in it. For me, I wouldn't be something I would recommend.
Did you go keto and thought you had to give up wine? Well, let me introduce you to Dry Farm Wines. It is the world's first sugar-free alcohol that is lower than your typical wines, organic, made at local farms that do it the right way. Most of the wines that you buy are from 3 really big companies, loaded with additives and preservatives, so many dozens of those kinds of things. You don't want all that junk in your wine. So go to dryfarmwines.com/Jimmy and they will ship you these wines. And just because you listen to this podcast, Dry Farm Wines is going to give you a bottle in your first order for just 1 cent. Go to dryfarmwines.com/Jimmy and you will get your bottle of wine for just 1 singular penny. Go check them out. Dry Farm Wines, you guys. It's wine o'clock somewhere. Let's go get some
I think it's the great minority that is into dry fasting and the great minority into no salt while fasting. I've heard both concepts and they are not in the mainstream. Doesn't mean they're wrong. Just means it's not right for everyone, which is good. When I've done guided fasts before, whenever I take a sip of water, I always say dilly dilly, and we drink water together.
No, water is so important. And one of the things I can tell you, like today's a good example. I've been doing a lot of press for the book, for which I am very grateful. And I was telling my husband, I know I can already tell, like, we're midway through the day. And in between these things, I keep running to grab more water and drink more electrolytes and then, run in between, because by the end of the day, I'm sure I'll be super dehydrated from all of this talking I'm doing. But it's always all for a good purpose.
But this is the fun part of pushing a book. So you're enjoying it.
I am, because I get to connect with really cool people.
Yes, thank you. So intermittent fasting transformation, the IF45 plan. Let's get into that. We're running a close on time, so I want to make sure you've got 3 phases of the 45 days. Kind of give the elevator pitch of what that is.
Yeah, so we spend a whole week getting ready to fast. So you're cleaning out your pantry, you're getting ready to understand what are contained basics. We pull out snacking, which no one should be snacking. We're grown-ass adults. You're helping to restructure your meal, so you're going to have success. And then you phase into actually fasting, going from dinner to breakfast. And then slowly opening up that fasting window. so that you're having success. You're learning a ton about what's going on behind the scenes. I would say under the hood, this is the things that are happening in your body even before you see a difference on, I would say, non-scale victories, before you see a difference on the scale. Then we kind of pivot into some challenges, some really cool challenges. I always say I've had the benefit of learning from so many amazing clinicians, learning different strategies that are designed to push you a little bit. When we talked about hormesis, so things that are going to push your fasting to another level, longer fasts, more graduated fasts. So that's like the third variation. And then throughout the book, we're really talking about nutrition. There are over 50 recipes created by Beth Lipton, who I think is one of the most talented chefs I've ever encountered. And so really leaning into a carnivore-ish lower carb. I say lower carb. There were a lot of people who've expressed concern about this being a ketogenic book. And I tell people all the time, I'm like, listen, I'm all about nutrient density and hitting your protein macros. And that's really a big focus. Really delicious recipes that are designed to be easy without weird ingredients, easy to put together, because I value everyone's time. And I know, yes, I'm obsessed with egg roll bowls, like just obsessed. So we spend a good amount of time talking about the nutrition piece. And so it's super exciting. And there are some really fun recipes that are in there. So it's not just, we've even got some fun like chocolate things. And as I said before, dark chocolate's one of my favorite things. So designed to fully encompass, giving you all the basics about intermittent fasting for women, what makes this unique, honoring your physiology and your cycle if you're still having one.
It's beautiful, and I love the way you ramp into it. And look, I'm all about like giving people accessibility to something they think is hard. So this IF45 plan, it's great, and plus you branded it, so good job.
Yes.
I love people that think through things and kind of come up with a branding that makes it easy for people to conceptualize. So now people will say IF45, just like Ben Azadi says keto flexing.
Yeah.
Knows what that is now because he's branded it. So so earlier we were talking about like my ice baths being kind of a hormesis. I want to have a little bit of time here at the end where we talk about it. You've mentioned it a few times, even in the context of our conversation. What are some of those hormesis, hormetic things that people could add to? And let's say this: fasting is a hormetic stressor as well.
Yes.
And freak out when they hear the word stress, but it's a stress in a good way. Can you explain hormesis and why people should be proactive at trying to pursue these kinds of things, and then what things can do in addition to intermittent fasting?
Yeah, so when I think about hormesis or hormetic stress, it's beneficial stress in the right amount at the right time. It makes us stronger and more resilient. And it's important, really important that we're doing these things. So high intensity interval training, where you go all out for 20 seconds and you back off for 10 seconds. So high intensity interval training, cryotherapy or cold showers, thinking about infrared sauna, or just even exercising. Fasting is another one. There's actually like specific types of foods that are supposed to be able to boost some degree of hormesis, but I tend to focus on the tangible things because I think that makes it a little bit more accessible for people. So again, yes, it is a stressor, but it's beneficial stress in the right amount at the right time, and it makes us stronger, more resilient. And Lord knows after the past 2 years, we all need stuff to make us stronger and more resilient, but it's really easy ways that make us less comfortable. That's the easiest way to explain it. Like if you're a couch potato, you're comfortable. We don't want to be comfortable. We want to push ourselves. We want to find small ways in our lifestyles that can push our body. So whether it's you get a little breathy because you're doing HIIT, or you get a little cold because you are doing some hormesis. In fact, my husband and I laugh. We walk our dogs a couple miles every day, and he usually goes out without a coat in the morning when it's been 19 or 20 degrees. And he said, I'm working on my hormesis. And I was like, that's true. That's a good thing. So letting yourself get a little cold, letting yourself get a little bit warm in a beneficial way, really leaning into these things because heck, we need to work on being less comfortable. We don't grow when we're comfortable. That's the one thing I tell my kids. They don't like hearing it, but I tell them like getting uncomfortable is a good thing. It means you're growing.
Yes, and as of a couple days ago on Sunday here in the South, probably was where you are as well. It got super cold in the morning. I think it was the cold whole year, it was something like 23, 24 degrees Fahrenheit here. So Jimmy's like, yeah, let's get out there with our bathing suit on and stand in the backyard in the weather. And I withstood it about 30 minutes, Cynthia.
That's amazing.
Got real numb. My toes and feet got numb, but the rest of my body was okay. I didn't shiver because I've been able to train my way through regular hormesis to be able to handle the cold. And then I got on top of that into a 32-degree temperature ice bath for 3.5 more minutes. Then I was inside a couple hours, and then I did a 75-minute walk in 33-degree temperature with short and t-shirt on. So, needless to say, Jimmy a little bit overdid his hormesis that day.
But that's amazing. That's absolutely amazing. There was a young woman who asked a question. 50-year-old woman, lifts weights. What do I think about intermittent fasting? I would start with the basics. I think that's completely reasonable to start with removing snacking, adjust your macros, and then kind of go from there. I definitely spend a lot of time talking about menopause and kind of the unique characteristics of that. I think it's great if you're already lifting weight 4 days a week, you're way ahead of the curve. And I don't want any woman or man, for that matter, to be afraid of doing body weight exercises or lifting weights and using that as a transition. There's nothing more sad as a clinician to go in and see your 55-year-old patient who can't get off the bedside commode because their leg strength is so poor because they have literally not been doing much physical activity. I'm not talking about you have to do CrossFit. I'm just saying, body weight exercises to start, but definitely working on, building muscle, maintaining muscle, really, really important, especially with age.
Yes, Karen, thank you for that question. I was getting to that question, but Cynthia was like, I see a question. I want to. Well, thank you so much for being here today again, you guys. Cynthia or Thurlow _, is her name, and she's got a wonderful podcast. If you've never listened before, I've been a guest on there before.
Yes, you have.
Wellness podcast, and she's got a very famous viral TEDx video all about kind of the topic for her book. Was that kind of the inspiration, the fact you got so much feedback from that TEDx talk?
I did. And so IF45 really came out of all that attention for people who wanted to be coached into doing fasting. And so I experimented with 60 days, 30 days, and 45 days was the sweet spot. I always say it's when you're an entrepreneur, you're constantly creating content. And I just found 45 days was the best. It was not too long. It was not too short. It was just enough time to get people interested, invested in trying a new strategy. And so, yeah, that viral TED Talk changed everything.
Yeah, 45 days. It's 6 weeks. If you can't change your life, there's something bad wrong. So
exactly.
Up a copy of the book, Intermittent Fasting Transformation, the 45-day program for women to lose stubborn weight, improve your hormonal health, and slow aging. I can tell a publisher did that subtitle because that's all the little keywords for Amazon when people start looking up stuff.
Exactly. I'm just happy. I just got the IF45 on the cover, and that was like my big thing. If we can make that happen, I'm happy. So.
Yeah, you did get the logo. That's great. Well, thank you so much for being here today. Good luck with the rest of your book.
Thank you.
Happy fasting.
Time to get inspiration from the Living La Vida Low Carb Show. Hey, the livinglowcarbshow.com. Woo!
Have you experienced the dreaded keto flu? Did you know that most of these symptoms are actually due to your body dumping excess electrolytes? This is where Element comes in. Element is a tasty electrolyte drink mix with everything you need and nothing you don't. That means lots of salt with no sugar. Element is formulated to help anyone with their electrolyte needs and is perfectly suited to folks following a keto, low carb, or paleo diet. Element contains a science-backed electrolyte ratio, 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 200 milligrams potassium, and 60 milligrams of magnesium, with none of the junk, no sugar, no coloring, no artificial ingredients, no gluten, no fillers, no BS. Everyone needs electrolytes, especially those on low-carb diets, or if you practice intermittent or extended fasting, if you're physically active or sweat a lot. Add Element today and see how much better you feel and perform. Use the URL drinklmnt.com/Jimmy.
Tired of playing the mask game?
Me too. That's why I wanted to tell you about the Unmask. This is a breathable, completely breathable. It covers, you can't even see that it's breathable, but it's breathable. Whether you're going on a plane, having to go into a store and wearing this thing, playthemaskgame.com is how you can get this mask. They come in all kinds of colors and everything. In fact, right there, you can see right through it what it is, but when you're wearing it, it does not look like it's anything different, but it's breathable, baby. Playthemaskgame.com.